All right, I heard during the coffee break already that some of you were desperately waiting for this panel because it is a very exciting one, maybe a slightly scary one. We've heard that Donald Trump has just made a TV host from Fox News his defense secretary. What could possibly go wrong? J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect, has said during the campaign that if the EU regulated Elon Musk, that there would be no defense help from the US. So this should be interesting. And what does that all mean for us? Economists think about competitiveness and economic growth and so forth. Now, we all had to become epidemiologists during the pandemic, and now we all have to become defense experts. But the problem is, of course, that the number of economists who really fundamentally understand national security is in the low single digits. The good news is that we have some of them here on the panel here with us, and I would like to introduce them just very briefly before we continue. Guntram, I start with you because you're one of them. Former head of Bruegel, of course, known in the city, then leading Germany's foreign policy think tank DGAP, now back in Brussels at the university, and affiliated with the Kiel Institute on Geoeconomics. And after working on German defense, has probably lost all optimism, but we shall see about that. Let's see. Marco BUTI, formerly of the European Commission, now with the EIU in Florence. I mean, he just picks the right jobs and locations. He has witnessed economic crises in Europe and sort of crucial times where Europe needed to find money desperately. And we made it through all of them quite intact. So I'm desperately hoping for a dose of optimism from you, Marco. Then we have Jan P., who represents European defense all the way to the end, and aerospace industry here in Brussels, wondering how the world has changed for him, which doors are open now that have previously been closed. François, ARBAULT, I probably butchered that name, from the Commission, Director for Defense, Industry and Space. That post may not have been a career booster in previous years, but it certainly is now. And he can tell us what the EU intends to do to contribute to a thriving defense sector. And last but absolutely not least, Angelika Niebler, she's an MEP, member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense subcommittees of the EP. She probably has not slept that well on the night of the November 5th, but maybe she's rested now and can tell us what she concludes about European defense policy. Angelika, can I start with you? Dive right in. The election of Donald Trump has put Europe's basic needs, such as security, sharply into focus. And I guess the question on everybody's mind is, if push comes to shove, can we in Europe sustain support for Ukraine on its own, financially, politically, militarily, or are we so crucially dependent on the US that we depend on Donald Trump now?
Well, first of all, Mr. Udner, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here and to share my thoughts with you. And well, coming immediately to the point, I think supporting the Ukraine is supporting the European Union, and for me, it's really key that we do everything to keep the support ongoing. And if you allow me just to stress, you know, I'm just coming out from the hearings of our commissioners. You know, we have a new commissioner now being already confirmed, Mr. Andrius Kopilius. He's in charge of defense and of space. He's a great commissioner. He will be a great commissioner. I'm very happy that he took over this task. But just citing him, you know, when you calculate how much we have spent overall in the European Union to defend Ukraine, it's more than the US has done so far. So we spent altogether 100 billion euros in supporting him, compared to 84 billion, you know, subsidies or financial support also from the US. I know it's difficult, but I think for us it's absolutely key that we do everything in order to keep on going, supporting Ukraine. So for us it's key. Then secondly, if you ask me how do we do that, I think we have to find out what is necessary, what is needed. And what I learned from our friends in the Ukraine, the most important thing now is really to deliver Taurus, you know, our cruise missiles, support as regards logistics, to move on producing ammunition, etc., etc. So that is very key. That is very important. And as regards to that, we have done over the last couple of years quite a lot in order to get more resilient from the US. So we, as you know, we really, production is ongoing now, and we really we spend quite a lot of money also. We took all the money we had in the European Union in different budgets, you know, to cope with the challenges laying ahead of us as regards to this horrible war in the Ukraine. So I will not say it's easy, and of course we have to talk to the US. We have to use all possible, you know, relationships which can be encouraged to move on, so that we get a sort of mutual understanding. We have to strengthen NATO. I'm happy that Sweden and Finland now are members of NATO. So I think it's not as bad as you might have maybe assessed at the very beginning. And again, please let me stress, whenever we have a crisis in Europe, you know, I think Europe is good in managing crisis. Yeah? And I strongly rely on, we know now what has to be done. And well, we have a new parliament in power now, and I think the majority in parliament is absolutely supporting further support for Ukraine. So when the commission is going to get into power quite soon, we will have also, I think, a strong commission. So, and on behalf of the member states, we have some problematic member states like always, but I think we'll find a way really to continue our support. So maybe that's my first assessment, and I'd like to be a little bit more optimistic than, you know, just looking at the US. We have a lot of things to do. We have to do our homeworks, but I think everyone is now aware of what's at stake, and for that we have to do it.
Yeah, no, I think you know, the task is a bit terrifying to those who don't know in national security and how it all works that well. But I guess everybody agrees that the task is really big, and sort of refocusing Europe on security will be with us for a while to come. And I wanted to start with Jan on the defense industry, because the task. To what extent do you feel that the task is already being tackled? Sort of the increased defense spending, the increased commitments, the probably led Europe's industry already to invest quite heavily. But are we already at the stage where we could say, okay, this is sort of the investment level that we need going forward, or are we just at the beginning of tackling this? There's a switch.
Now? Better?
Yes.
Yes. So, too high tech for me, the microphone. So, first of all, I think indeed that we are, I wouldn't even say at the beginning, but maybe that's a fair phrase to use. I mean, we need to recognize that we're coming from decades of underinvestment on the defense industry side, or on the defense side as a whole in Europe. And I think from one perspective, it's really tragic to realize at the end of the day that when you deal with a person like Putin and with Russia, of course, it would have been much cheaper to invest in deterrence than to actually try to handle defense. This is a lessons learned for the future, I think. The level of underinvestment, one need to think about as well when we speak about defense industry, what kind of capabilities are you supposed to be able to counter from the aggressor? So here when we think about technological edge, a lot of the investments on the European side has been about, not about the volumes, not about the numbers, but about the technological edge. And when you deal with the technological edge, you need to think about what are the numbers of investments that are being done in R&D, R&T, and things like that in other countries as well that you will have to deal with. And here Europe has been lagging behind constantly. So it's a problem from the high-end level as well as from the volume level. Now, where are we? If we look at a little bit on numbers, as just to set the scene a little bit, between 2008 and 2014, we were actually seeing defense spendings in Europe drop with roughly 1% a year until the invasion of the Crimea Peninsula. This was a turning point, and from then we've seen an increase with roughly 3% because the geopolitical situation really dramatically changed. So there you can see a response. Now, in 2023, we saw a 5% increase as an average on European member states, and in 2024, we saw a 9%. So indeed, you can see that there is an upturn. We are starting to build the capabilities that we need, but we are running very far behind the train. We find it difficult. We struggle to support we struggle to deliver the support to our member states that they deliver to Ukraine. And we have severe problems on both sides of the ecosystem, if I would say so. It's not that, I mean, I do agree, first of all, fully that there is no other option than to continue the support. There is no other option than to just continue building up these defense capabilities. But the starting point is really at a dramatically low level, and we have problems on the financial side in terms of that there's still far too long lead time between political agreements, increased defense spendings before you have the contract to the industry. That lead time is still like in a peacetime process in many cases. And then on the other hand, we have for the industries, if they don't get the contracts, of course, then you cannot take the risks, depending on which company we speak about, depending on the size of the company, etc. But on the supply side for the companies, they also have a lot of problems. There's still this access to finance issue, which is a problematic issue. We have many SMEs across the ecosystem that is testifying about how difficult it is to get access to finance. As we speak, just to exemplify, as we speak, despite the war that's been going on now for 2 years, we still have a situation where an SME could go to a local banker, let's take in Italy, for example, and the SME would have been asked by the government to ramp up its production with 200 or 300% or something like that. And to do that, you need to invest in a new production line, you need to lend a little bit of money, and you would knock on the door to the banker, and the banker would say, excellent that you popped by. We have a new lending policy, and we can't have defense companies in that lending policy. So right. Unfortunately,
okay.
And that, just to wrap it up very quickly, that part is access to finance, but it's now also access to energy, it's access to skills, it's access to commercial tools, because we have also, and hear me out on that one, because I think this is really the starting point here. We have companies on the defense side that in order to increase their production, they need to buy a machine tool from the commercial market. And the commercial market would say, I don't want to sell to you because you're a defense company. So this is where we are. We have problems on both ends. So it's really an uphill battle.
Okay, understood. François, just to sort of get us all up to speed on where we are. Your job is in part to make sure that there's less duplication in Europe when it comes to procurement processes and different types of weapons and so forth. To what extent have we already made progress on that? Because this has been a long-standing issue. If we talk about there were people in the 2010s who talked about sort of the defense single market, right? It was not an unknown topic, but it wasn't as sort of urgent, I guess. So has there been any progress? And what is are you optimistic that that further progress can be made? Where sort of do we stand on this?
Yeah, that was. Yeah, I will broaden a bit the scope of the question, but I intend to answer it, of course. I mean, what is our job? Our job is to make sure that the EU contributes to the best, and when I mean the EU and its member states, or we're enabling the member states to make the best possible contribution to the EU defense readiness. So this is about making the EU defense ready. How? Well, by actually making the best possible decisions. So duplication, I mean, doing away with duplication is one of the answers, but I think we have the overarching objective to make sure that we are defense ready. Are we defense ready? Absolutely not. And I think we are too slowly waking up to that reality. I mean, as Jan said, I mean, we know that industry is moving, is scrambling when the orders are placed. The orders are still not placed in a way that is commensurate to the imminence of the threat. So there is a threat, there is an acute threat, and I think we are again realizing that, but still very slowly. Now, how do we make sure that all together we are as efficient as can be? And this is about really acting together to neutralize means, to actually create together the conditions of a competitive industry that actually indeed meets the expectations of the member states. Because it's very good to have a very competitive industry, and it's the case. But the fact is that it cannot be the only driver of the decisions to be taken. member states need the industry to be responsive to their needs in volume and in time and in the right capabilities and techs when we need them. If we have just a very competitivity IB that says to the member states, sorry guys, but you will have to wait a few more years to get the capacity that you need, we are doomed. So we need indeed to be more effective together. That requires the understanding of the capabilities that we need. For that, we need to have a more European conversation. Of course, member states are the one making decisions on what is it that we need. But we need to have, again, a collective discussion on, okay, we need more investment, so let's make decisions to get more money. But, and that's another question. But, okay, depending on the pot of money we have, what is it that we agree are the top priorities on which we need to put industry to work? And that place to have that collective conversation is not really existing. We need to better connect the world of the identification of capability needs, and that's for the military, for the member states to drive that conversation. But we need to connect that with those who can activate the instrument, the EU budget, possibly think of how to actually mobilize investment means also for the member states to be able to invest to the commensurate, need. And so we need, again, to interface those two worlds, the first pillar of the EU, where the instrument, the spending programs are, and also those who are experts to define the capability needs. Then we need to unlock the investment. We know that the needs, basically the sky is the limit. So we need to find ways to mobilize public funding, but we need also to mobilize private finance. We are still very much struggling to do that. The EIB is, making slow progress in that respect. They have relaxed the dual-use rule, but still, I think we are very short of sending the right message to the private finance that financial institutions need to move in support of defense. And then, indeed, and finally, we need to actually equip ourselves with the tools to do things more efficiently, meaning together. Together, we need to actually procure, for instance, the equipment so that we finally give to the industry the predictability in terms of the orders that will unlock investment decisions. We are still, faced with, piecemeal, basically orders, small orders being basically placed on a kind of random mode, and industry simply fails to take the decision to invest in new production line because they don't have visibility on whether they can recoup their investment. Okay. So this is and that takes indeed ending the fragmentation of the supply side. That stems actually from the demand side fragmentation. And we've done a lot of progress with the EDF, 4 billion euros already invested in cooperative R&D projects stemming from member states having decided together on the priorities. We've actually adopted the ASAP that actually takes a European approach to the ramping up of industry. We have actually adopted the EDIRPA that fosters, that incentivizes drone procurement. Watch this space. In the coming hours or days, we will get the results of the first ever call for proposals on member states to propose projects on the drone procurement of equipment that we urgently need. So there is a lot we can do with the ongoing discussion on EDIP now in Parliament, already discussed with the member states. We will further add new intervention logics to the ones we have already, notably to de-risk investment. I think that's one of the motto of what we want to do, how to de-risk, how to share the risk between the public and the private sector. Mm-hmm. And also security of supply. I mean, I will close here, but that's absolutely central. We need, again, to be equipped to tackle the challenges of shocks on our supply chains. So far, it's really scattered across, in the member states. So again, we need to have a place to discuss how make sure that we have green lanes in the defense sector if we're faced with shocks, economic shocks, security shocks. But that's also one way to be more efficient together. So I will leave it at that, but it's about not only ending duplications, but making sure that we are collectively efficient.
Okay, so you have a lot more to do than I thought then. Guntram, you've recently looked at the numbers, sort of how much additional defense investments spending is needed in Europe. I don't remember the exact figures. I just remember thinking, well, this is not going to work, is it? So it's just, maybe you can give us a few of those numbers and put them a bit into context of how much additional spending in Europe is necessary.
Well, thanks for the invitation. Look, I think the ideal number would be one produced by security experts telling us this is what we need, this is where we are, this is the delta, and this is the plan how to fill this gap. However, the defense community is quite tight-lipped when it comes to what they actually would like to have and where exactly they would want to be. So what I did in my study published in September for the Kiel Institute is basically look at what is Russia doing and comparing our efforts to what Russia is doing. And the other metric is looking at what Germany used to do in Cold War period or 10 years after, and where it is now. So on Russia, the number is absolutely frightening. Russia has massively increased its production of all the key weapon systems. Now, there is a bit of, and there I disagree with some of the reports in The Economist. There is a bit of sort of a debate to what extent all of this is just refurbishing of old Soviet tanks, and in a year's time they all ran out, and then Russian production will completely drop. My view is yes, there is some of that, but what we see, and we have a full chapter on this, we see also a significant modernization of the defense industrial base in Russia, moving away from old tanks to very new systems, really moving away from the refurbishing model to a model of modernization. And so that's a sort of one big debate. The big numbers, and this chapter was written with a Russia expert, a security expert, so not just an economist. Basically, our statement is the headline figure is Russia produces now in half a year roughly as much as the entirety of Germany's Bundeswehr stock is at the moment, right? So this is one number. The second number is compared to where Germany used to be 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and there the numbers are not much better. Germany has had 30 years of peace dividend, many other European countries as well, but in Germany it was particularly pronounced. But I mean, defense spending all over Europe fell. And the gap is so big that if you take sort of numbers like tanks again, just to illustrate it, Germany used to have more than 3,000 tanks. In 2004, it was still 2,400 tanks. Now Germany is at 340, something like this. Yeah, and that's more or less the same number that France and the UK has. Poland is a bit better. The production numbers, the sort of ordering activity of Germany in the last 2.5 years has been that Germany delivered 18 Leopard 2 to Ukraine and ordered 18 to replace these 18. And then only in July of this year, so basically 2.5 years after the start of the war, there was then an order of 105. So now you take the ordering of 105 divided by 2.5 years, that brings you an ordering number of 40, 50, 45 or so per year. To reach the gap to the levels that we used to have 20 or 30 years ago, you need not a few years, you need decades. And that's a problem, in particular, if you think that Boris Pistorius, the German defense minister and the most popular politician of Germany, by the way, is right that Russia might be ready to attack a NATO country in 5 to 8 years. I mean, decades for replenishing our forces is not going to be enough. And so I mean, just to sum up, what we need is I think, two things. We need funding, not just current budget, but long-term budget planning that we don't have. You look at German budgetary planning. All the procurement of the last 2.5 years, almost all of it goes through this special one-off debt fund. The main budget, Einzelplan 14, is at 1.2%, so it's basically not moved. Supposedly in 2028 it will jump to 2%. Well, okay, let me see the political majorities in the Bundestag, and then I'll tell you whether that's going to happen. At least as a defense company, I will not invest in the industrial production processes needed for that. And so we need funding, the long-term funding planability. And we need the scale. The scale is not there. Every European country buys small quantities from their own domestic producer. Germany buys Panzerhaubitzen, the French buy the Caesar artillery, the Slovaks buy the Slovak, and so on. And so the numbers are very small. And when you produce in small quantities, you don't invest in industrial processes. You don't buy robots that build these tanks and these artilleries. And so the cost per unit is really very high. And you can see that the cost per unit is higher the smaller the quantities are. Yeah? And so I think we need both. We need scale. We need an integration of the single market. And we need the long-term budget planning to be able to really invest.
Thank you, Marco. That brings you a bit into the fray, because you've been, as I said before, sort of at the heart of European policy making when Europe needed to find money. And we've just heard sort of the German government practically collapsed over defense and security spending and how to fund that. France is running sort of American-style deficits, even while it is not sending that much to Ukraine in the first place, and probably needs to do a lot more. Italy... Well, let's not talk about Italy. So how on earth are we going to fund this? I mean, where is the money of a sort of 1-2 percentage points of GDP increase in defense spending across Europe supposed to come from?
I mean, after Guntram, I think we need a drink. We fund it with money.
We fund it with money.
This is not a banal answer, because in the past, what we have done in Europe is that since money was the stumbling block, we tried to find way around. And way around was, to regulate and go the regulatory channel rather than facing the money issue in the first place. So we need to find the money, clearly. I mean, the issue is so systemic. It's clear from the round of intervention that we have heard that I am thinking about approaching this in terms of European budgetary system. Now, a good way, at least in my mind, to frame the issue is to think about the delivery and the financing combined with EU level and national level. So you take the 2 by 2 and you have the 4 combinations. Now, let's go through quickly each one of the cells. One is the first one is national delivery for and national financing. Now, the way Europe can help on that front is essentially at this stage here through an appropriate implementation of the new fiscal rules. They have just been adopted. They are now going to be start to be implemented. The member states have put forward the fiscal structural plans, and in the new rules, you have provisions for defense. One is that you can be in one of the key priorities in Europe. You can use that as a good argument to lengthen the adjustment period from 4 to 7 years. By the way, it seems that Germany now are also thinking about the 4, lengthening to 4 to 7. There is a bit of poetic justice here, and you have also the possibility. When a country goes, shows that deficit higher than 3%, you have the, if this is justified by higher defense spending, you have a treatment that is the different one. So this is the implementation of the fiscal rules. Then you have the second combination in which you have the national financing and delivery at the European level. So this is what Draghi's report dwells upon, and it is the issue of aggregation of demand. So we did it for the vaccines during the pandemic, and there is also now the opportunity and the possibility to scale up in terms of demand. We are now at least the data that I have seen. I don't know if they are the very latest ones. Is that there is a target in the European Defence Agency of 35%. we are about half of that. And when it comes to the public procurement, a large majority goes outside, is not satisfied domestically within the EU. That may be a mixed blessing now that we enter into negotiations with the new US administration. The fact that given the fact that they are going to have, as we know already, a very transactional approach, that could be a possibility, in the sense to enter into a discussion, at least in the short term. So public procurement, demand aggregation. Then you get the delivery at the national level, financing at the EU level, and here the model is what we have now, next generation EU. So how do you do that? How do you provide the funds on that front? Okay, if you think in an innovative way, you can think about another next generation EU fund. Now, this is, we have the legal tools. We have used, I left the Commission 1.5 years ago. We used, for the first time ever, about a dozen times, Article 122. Article 122 is the article which allows for the Union to intervene where it doesn't have competencies, basically.
Yeah, in an emergency.
Under urgency. It was an article almost never used previously, so 12 times. So we can use it again. It is not without complications, obviously, because you need to have the backing of the member states, but I think it can be used.
But can I just ask, you're spelling out different ways to increase the deficit, basically. NGU is debt funded, fiscal rule deficits prolonging is deficit. So basically what you're saying is we need debt funding for that kind of...
On the EU budget side, you can go the two ways. Then I tell you where you should not do.
Okay.
On the budget side, you have the two complementary ways. You need more own resources. And I think we have here struggled with limited success in the past. But I hope the current situation focuses attention clearly. So that you can use to increase spending in defense, financed directly by the own resources. Or you can use the new own resources or guarantees from the member states to actually go out and borrow.
Right.
So that is the other possibility. Now the fourth one is delivery and financing takes place at the EU level. And there you have to overcome, if you want to do that via the EU budget, you overcome the hurdle of Article 41(2), which does not allow the Union and the EU budget to finance defense spending. Now, this, I think, is a typical case of lawyers on top, not lawyers on top.
Okay.
So they will need to tell us how to do it, not say that we cannot do it. Right. And I think there is sufficient ingenuity here to allow to overcome that hurdle there. Now, you can also, and finally, you can also mobilize other instruments that we have, other institutions. Okay, what do we do with the ESM?
Okay.
Maybe it's not very popular in this environment here, to the extent that there are many,
I don't know, maybe we still need the ESM for other things.
But, okay, what do you do on the EIB side? Dual technology, they can finance, we can go beyond that. Now, what you cannot do is, first of all, thinking, I have seen in the newspapers today, divert a share of unused resources in the cohesion fund to finance defense. I think this is a ridiculous proposal.
Okay.
It is, yes.
I thought it was quite good. Is it?
No,
it was both.
I'm not saying that as part of a package where where you have ambitious, proposals, you can also envisage something of that sort. I think it's going to be, a high hurdle. But anyway. What you cannot do is to use that as a way to respond, because it's going to be peanuts. That is not going to be what solves the problem.
Right. Okay. Angelika, can I ask you about sort of the funding options that Marco just laid out? I mean, increasing deficits is difficult in Germany, as we are figuring out, is difficult in countries like France that have already deficits, which not just from a rules perspective, but increasingly from an economic perspective are unsustainable. Let's leave out Italy. So the question is there any other way than a common EU debt fund that has been proposed by some member states already, particularly in the East? This is not a proposal now coming from Southern Europe. This is a proposal coming from Northeast Europe, where we, I guess, definitely want to strengthen their defenses also for our own security. So it seems plausible that we can think of a debt-funded defense instrument at the European level. But we also know that opposition to that might be strong. So what is your view? Is that the way to go?
Well, actually, I think a lot of issues have already been addressed here on the podium, so I will not repeat that. But I think, first of all, we have to find out what we need. Well, and thanks for your analysis on that. Yeah. Secondly, I think we have to see where we can do some structural reforms. So joint procurement, for instance, was addressed by colleagues here. So I think this is also important. Yeah, where we can have synergies, energies. My feeling is now that there is much more willingness on behalf of the member states to cooperate, to work together, in particularly on the research and innovation field. So I think we should encourage to move on with regard to that. So a lot of synergies can be used if we do things not member state by member state, but in order to scale up, really, I think we have to push, and that will be done by Parliament, that we go for common approaches, that we go for common procurement, and to move on in that respect. And then we have to see, where we can take money from. So we will now start, or we already started in the political groups in the Parliament to discuss on the next MFF. We are at the very beginning of our discussions, but of course, we know that we expect European Commission coming up with a first draft or a first idea of how much money is needed within the next MFF in the middle of next year. And then, we will have our discussions, but we are not waiting for the Commission's proposal. We are also reconsidering right now how much money we need and where money is going to be allocated. And defense spending will be, I think, a new chapter also in the MFF. So I think there we will have a close look. And then we will have to look where we find money. Maybe the cohesion funds is not the right budget to look at, but Next Generation EU, a lot of money has not been spent, so I think we have to look at that. And then let me also come back on the EIF, on private investment. I think this is heavily needed, and there we have to. You mentioned, Jan, the lending policy in Europe. Honestly, this is crazy. We are in a situation. In the mission letter of Mr. Kubilius, it's written down that we have to prepare for the most for the most extreme military contingencies, and we still have a lending policy in Europe, according to taxonomy rules, that a defense industry cannot be funded or has a worse crediting rating, when this industry is attached. So this is ridiculous, and I think we have to change that immediately. And I know that also within the Commission, yesterday night, Hanna Virkkunen, our Vice Executive Commissioner President, also pointed out that she is already in discussions with EIB. So I think there a lot of things will happen. So summarizing, I think we have to look at everything. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but looking for private investment, looking for changing our lending rules, looking for what the EIB can do, encouraging member states also to come forward with really doing their job. 2% GDP. Well, you are much more in this topic, but honestly, the calculation can be done like it can be done. So I learned that when every member state is every NATO state is fulfilling its 2% GDP obligation, we would have more than 60 billion euro. In already now available every year. So I don't know as to whether that figure is correct, but just taking together all the possibilities we have, I think this might be quite a budget which is available, and at the very end, we should then have a look at the proposal of Draghi. on the financing side.
Okay, so at the very end, when all other avenues are explored. Guntram, can I just quickly ask you about the German government, because people are interested in sort of what is going on in Berlin. The German government has essentially collapsed to a large extent because of the Zeitenwende and the new security environment and how it can or not can be funded in the next couple of years. If Friedrich Merz called you and asked how his future government might do this while maintaining its so-called fetish of the black zero or the balanced budget, what would you say?
I would say my first statement is that the German government collapsed not just because of the defense side, but much more because of missing funding for the green transition, right? I mean, it's the Constitutional Court that interpreted the debt brake strictly, leading to a gap of, as you know, two-digit billion in funding the green transition, and that really was a big constraint. Now, the fetish of the black zero goes back to Wolfgang Schäuble, I would say. I mean, I think that's who should get credit for the term. The former finance minister. I personally think that. I mean, I'm quite close here to Mrs. Niebler. I mean, there is an issue of prioritization, but of course, it cannot stop there. I mean, there will be a debt dimension to it, but we will also have to reprioritize our spending. I mean, there's no question in my mind about it. We will not be able to structurally fund defense expenditure over decades. Just out of additional deficits. So my view is really, yes, a second debt fund I think is needed. I'm actually in favor of, and Friedrich Merz today I think said publicly that he's open to think about this. So I think it's good to have that debate, and it's good to have that reform probably before the next election, because after the next election there might not be the constitutional majority.
You mean the election in 2 months' time?
Exactly. So I think the debate is good to have this debate now, and perhaps even have.
You want it implemented before the election, before Parliament breaks?
To have the vote, the parliamentary vote.
Oh dear!
I think that would be safer than hoping to have a constitutional majority afterwards.
Understood. I actually brought the Financial Times because it was on the front page of the Financial Times were the cohesion funds. I think that was the only time that EU cohesion funds made it to the front page of the Financial Times, because, and that's what Marco referred to, sort of whether the EU's proposals or thinking about sort of repurposing some of that money for defense spending. Of course, weapons purchases are forbidden under the law, but as Marco said, sort of lawyers can find solutions, and there the question was, okay, can they be spent on sort of military mobility investment, of which there is apparently quite a lot. François, I don't know whether this proposal is being worked on in your unit, but I was still wondering sort of, how do we think about the EU budget in the next cycle when it comes to defense? Because we have had great ideas of what we can spend EU money on before. Then we go into the negotiations. Cohesion funds and agricultural funds are untouchable. And then it has to be negotiated down because the net payers don't want to cough up more. So basically all the new and innovative and future-oriented spending gets cut, whereas agricultural spending and cohesion funds remain sort of largely intact. I mean, this is sort of the usual political dynamic that has been played out now a couple of times. Is this time different in a sense that defense and our national security is so obviously at stake that it even can reform the EU budget, something that never anyone thought was possible?
I'm afraid I don't have all the answers to those fascinating questions. What is very clear is that we're faced with a threat, and again, it's not my, let's say, I have no authority on that, but it's absolutely clear that we are still a bit sleepwalking in terms of taking stock of the reality of that threat. And again, I mean, Gontram has mentioned a number of facts which are quite waking up, let's say. What I want to stress is that, in fact, this question about the money is a question on how to repay a debt that we owe to our security. I mean, the finding that we made just a few months after the brutal aggression on Ukraine, and actually for that reason, is that if we had spent the 2%, GDP target, and actually if you take the chunk of investment, not operating expenditure, but the investment that we should have consented, 20% of the overall investment in defense, we will have spent over the last 15 years 300 billion euros more in defense capabilities, and they are missing in the stores, in the warehouses. So we need to repay a debt to our security. And how do we do that? Indeed, and that's the key question that will probably indeed inform very much the next discussion on the MFF, and that is already informing that debate around the funding options. Again, there is no proposal of the Commission on what is on the front page of the FT. What I can say is that it's nothing really new under the sun, because there is a possibility, a number of programs, to actually reallocate unused money under shared management if that money has not been spent. I mean, it's good policy that if you see that you are unable to spend money, you might actually consider other uses. The member states are decision-making in that respect. So nothing will be ever made against the will of those member states that actually are sitting on a pile of money. And typically, I don't want to be a techie, but it's an example, the EDIRPA program that we actually adopted to incentivize the joint procurement, and again, we'll release the results very soon. You have a clause, it was actually decided in co-decision, that member states may decide to fund projects which could not be funded, in the first batch, thanks to the reallocation of unused, funds. So that's nothing really, let's say, totally revolutionary. Now, indeed, if we agree that we have a security issue that is quite imminent, if we agree that we are badly missing capabilities, how to reconcile that, how to fill that gap, well, that's a question that we need to collectively answer. Again, the private funding is one of the elements of the questioning that we must put to ourselves. I mean, we see that EIB, for instance, is sending to the markets a strong signal by basically keeping at bay any form of actual funding of defense for projects. I want to contest the fact that taxonomy is not standing in the way of the funding of defense. It's very often a kind of, myth that needs to be dispelled. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make it easy, but there is nothing in the EU acquis that says that taxonomy prevents you from funding defense. There is a strong signal market sent by the EIB that you don't fund defense. There is an exclusion policy on defense products. And because the financial institutions very much, basically relates to we need maybe a financial arm that is more fit for purpose. So EU Invest, for instance, probably is not necessarily the most adapted way to actually encourage private funding of defense. And again, public funding is indeed something that we need to look at. I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that, but we need a good discussion on that, that's for sure.
Thank you. Jan, let us come back to the private funding of defense industries. So François just said that the taxonomy does not stand in the way, but what is it then that stands in the way? Is it sort of internal rules that the banks have given themselves, sort of not to fund certain endeavors? Is it sort of the unwillingness of private investors to fund defense or to invest in funds that fund the defense industry? I mean, the times have changed. And maybe these attitudes can change too. Is this just sort of a lag that these processes need to be changed, and then at some point the funding access for defense industry will be better? Or are you quite pessimistic about sort of the access to funding, private funding for the defense industry?
I am positive. I am optimistic. I do believe that there will be a change. But let me just first make one comment on the discussion that has been ongoing here. I think on the funding of the defense as a whole. I think somebody just recently said at the IISS conference that took place in Prague, it was mentioned there by somebody, that militaries can win the battle, economies win the war. And if we look at, I don't know.
That was an economist who said that, right?
I like the quote.
Honestly, I don't remember. But it could have been.
It must be.
What I think is interesting is if you look at the size of the Russian economy and you consider that Putin is spending, what is it now? Is it 40% of the state budget that goes to the defense side production, right? And here we struggle to have the 2% target that we reach. The common European economy is by far, I don't know in how many factors bigger than the Russian economy. So the issue is not whether there's money. The issue is whether we want to give priority to defense or not. And where we take the money from, that we can discuss. But the money is there. There's no doubt about that from my perspective. Now, looking into as well the different, I think that it's very important to have a broader picture on the different roles here. I think NATO, we need to realize what is the NATO role with the operational planning and everything that NATO is doing versus what EU is doing versus what the member states are doing. It's, for me, it is a lot of discussions in Brussels that takes place around what should the Commission do in the next step, what can be the next EU funding, what can be the next EU budget. But as a starting point, defense budgets has been a budgetary regulator for member states for 20 years, 30 years, something like that. And it's really there that you see the volume of money. This is where you need to have a serious commitment to defense and need to realize this is an investment that you do, an insurance premium that you pay. The Commission has come in over the last, I'd say, even 10 years or something like that, increased its role dramatically and done it from my perspective, in an almost tremendous way. It's far beyond what anyone could have thought that the role of the Commission would be like 5 or 6 years ago with the instruments that we see now. But keep in mind that these instruments, at the best, they can coordinate and catalyze member states to do the right thing. But it's still the member states that needs to do those things. And without the willingness from member states, it won't work. So this, I think, is what François mentioned as well. This is extremely important. Having said that, going to your direct question, when I speak to, because we really try to understand what is the reason for the pension funds, for the bankers, etc., to say no to the defense industry. So we reached out, we talked directly to a number of them, and I'll just quote from a discussion I had with the CEO of a private bank, and he told me it's very simple. He said, I'm under constant scrutiny of the NGOs. And when the NGOs find out that I have a part of my lending portfolio in the defense side, because it's a very small part, then they declare war against the bank on social media. And that's a war that is very difficult to counter. It's a war you cannot handle, and it actually addresses the entire brand of the bank. Now, then it becomes a business decision, because then you simply look at it. I have a war on social media that affects the brand of the bank, and how much of my lending portfolio is on defense, maybe 0.5%. What do? You get rid of it. That's the easy way out. Now, if you think that this is the way out, and then on top of that you don't have any more, but you had the Commission's taxonomy files and eco-labeling on financial retail products going in the same direction, that was like an indicator that indeed the NGOs are right, because the Commission is thinking in the same way. Now the Commission has changed their mindset. This is clear. There's a number of policies and there's a number of activities going in the other direction, explaining that sustainability, investing in defense is indeed a key enabler for sustainability, so there's no contradiction. This is clear. But for the banker, the business case has not changed. And secondly, for the banker, as François mentioned, and several others, by the way, mentioned that as well, the European Investment Bank, they have this exclusion in their lending portfolio that they're not allowed to lend to pure defense projects, as you mentioned here. Now, that sends a very strong signal to the national banks, because if the national banks find it difficult to deal with the defense industry, they can't defend themselves, etc., etc., and then policymakers at the national head of government level or European level tell the banker, you need to change your policies, you need to allow the defense companies to be part of that. Then the response is simply, okay, why don't you do that at the European level? Why should I bother with that at the local level if you don't even do it in the European Investment Bank? And hey guys, let's be honest here, it's the finance ministers that are at the board of the European Investment Bank. So should you want a change, head of government should only instruct the finance ministers to vote. It takes only a vote at the board. That vote has not taken place, and this is monitored by the entire financial market actors ecosystem. But am I negative or positive? I think there's momentum in the change, because this is now being discussed everywhere, and I think where the public opinion is also gaining momentum, that it makes sense to invest in defense.
Okay. We are coming towards the Q&A session. This panel has been super exciting, so I sort of lost track of time a bit. But if you have questions, then please make yourselves known. I have one final question for the panel before I give the floor to you. And this is about sort of integrating other countries into Europe's defense market. Because Ukraine is probably a very innovative and productive place in defense systems. Britain is outside the EU. So to what extent does it make sense to build a defense union just in the European Union context, right? And what about our integration defense-wise with our overseas allies other than the United States? So are there any ideas of how to integrate them into sort of our thinking of defense procurement? Because sometimes it appears to me, okay, I sit in London, fair enough, but it's a sort of that the EU focuses very much on its own sort of strategic autonomy and sort of wants to do it all by itself. But it doesn't seem to me that in this particular instance, Britain is so problematic, because Britain has very similar security interests as the rest of the EU, Norway, and maybe even Switzerland, who knows. So, Angelika, could I start with you? How do you think about sort of integrating other countries into that sort of European defense planning?
Well, first of all, I think the most important thing is first things first. Yeah? And we are at the beginning now of building up our European Defense Union. So this is a huge task which lays ahead of us. So I think we should now concentrate on that. But this is the beginning. Yeah. And well, you mentioned UK. I think we have to have close contacts with the UK, and there will be a time where we should also, getting closer. Yeah. Also as regards our defense policies. And of course, always within the scope of NATO, of course. But well, it's always philosophy of the European Union not to exclude anyone. And but again, I think we should now start with our member states here in the European Union. This is a huge task laying ahead of us. And if we manage, to go for a common procurement, if we go for common projects of common interests, I think this is we made good experiences in Europe with projects of common interest. If I look at the space sector, what we did with Galileo, with Copernicus, with secured connectivity, with EGNOS, etc., etc. So a lot of things really had been done properly and are success stories here in the European Union. So I'm very committed that the same thing will happen when we start, really building up a true European defense union. But that has to be done first, and then we have to, to consider what makes sense also with partners around us.
Understood. Gotcha.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think we need to start, of course, in the EU, but at the same time we need to integrate Ukraine into that defense industrial base, and ideally also the UK. I mean, Ukraine is absolutely essential, not only because it has a strong weapon industry itself and lots of technology and is quite cheap. I mean, we haven't talked much about the cost dimension, but I did want to react to the one point that sort of our collective economic size is big enough to confront Russia. That is true, but it's let's not underestimate the challenge, because when you look at military spending in purchasing power parity terms, which I think is the only relevant measure here, actually, Russia is 3.5 times bigger than the budget measured in US dollars. Yeah, so in US dollars, it's 120, perhaps a bit more billion US dollars. In purchasing power parity, that's equivalent to the more than 400 billion spent. And Europeans, I mean, our purchasing power parity compared to the US is not much better. So we are spending each 60, 70, 80 billion, something like that. I mean, Germany's like 80 something. So actually, compared to Russian spending of 400, more than 400, there is a cost issue here. And so if we can integrate the US defense industrial base into the European one, I mean, the gains, the efficiency gains are massive. And I wouldn't really exclude the Ukraine from our procurement efforts.
Just one comment. I understand your perception from the economic point of view, but I can only tell you, coming from the European Parliament, working in the European Parliament for such a long time, you have, well, for taking everyone on board to go for this European Union of defense, this is a real challenge because we have a lot of member states, big member states. For them, Ukraine is not topic number one. Not topic number one. Yeah? And if we overload the whole thing, I think it will be dangerous and we will not achieve anything at all. So let's take our 27 member states on board. I think that's a huge challenge because, well, if I look at the south of our member states, they are all committed to support now the Ukraine but it's not going to be like that forever, and the priorities on their political agenda are completely different ones. So that's, from the political perspective, something I think we should also take into consideration.
Okay, so it's difficult enough already, basically. Yes. Okay, Marco, how do you think about sort of integrating other countries into the EU defense funding or industry?
Look, if you look at defense now, taking a bit more analytical perspective, it is typically a public good. So there is non-excludability, non-rivalry for most of the things that we do. So we know in these cases here that there is an perverse incentive to drop out because you can protect anyway if the others do so, and that leads to a lower than optimal supply. So I think integrating as much as possible, that would be, I think, the name of the game. I think an issue here with the UK is an opportunity actually to rebuild strategically a perspective on that front. I think at the same time, I think it is clear from the discussion we had throughout the panel, but also take the previous panels. I mean, we cannot just move one thing there. That's, I mean, my comment before on the cohesion funds. It's not that I am against something of that sort within a global package which rediscusses a lot.
Okay.
It is, I'm against that if that is the cheap way out in order to fix the problem. That I think is not going to work. But here, so we have to be ready also for institutional innovation and starting with a group, leader group that will go further by themselves, and this even cutting some corners, I think, would be worth trying. I mean, you mentioned, and this is it's a more general consideration. I mean, having gone through crisis at the very beginning. Now, if I look at what I have lived myself and previous crises, I mean, basically, in order to make changes, you need 3 T's. That's what a 3T model. So you need threat, you need trust, and you need time. Now, the threat is evident. Difficult sometimes leaders do not recognize it, but it is clear and present even more now, given the latest developments. Trust, question mark. I think crisis focus the attention, so we may actually rebuild that. What I think is key here is time. But time, I mean it in the sense of having a sufficiently long time horizon which allows to internalize the benefit of common action. So low political discount rate, that is the key issue. Now, think about when we did Next Generation EU 3 years ago, 4 years ago. We had leaders with, at that moment, at that particular moment, quite long time horizon. I mean, Mrs. Merkel could think about history, not the next elections in a lender. Emmanuel Macron had 1.5 mandate in front, and institutionally we had Ursula von der Leyen, there with. Now, can we rebuild that type of configuration politically in order to do what is needed here? I think the elections in Germany are an opportunity. They are definitely an opportunity compared to the now huge question mark on France, and I think I count a lot on the duo Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa. And Antonio Costa is a formidable operator, a political operator. So I would really hope that the trust would be rebuilt there also institutionally, and that he would help to bring member states on board.
Okay, thank you. François, what about integrating, I mean, by job definition, probably you are about to say no, but I just want to sort of...
A very central and multifaceted question. I'll be very, very short. First, we must define the question. What do you mean by integration? I mean, and I skip that, but basically, NATO is the best guarantor of our collective security. This is absolutely undisputed, and you have there the US, you have there the UK. Which takes me to the second part of the answer. You have to distinguish security and defense partnerships, and basically here the sky is again the limits. It's a matter of political will and determination, but there are no legal obstacles to that, I will say. And actually, just a little reminder that, for instance, at the time of Brexit, there was openness at the beginning to a security and defense, partnership with the UK that actually was put down at the time. Now probably there is a clear result, but anyway. Now, when it comes, but basically, in terms of what the EU does, it contributes to the greater effectiveness of NATO through the contribution by its member states. They're only member states or allies. There's no secret, NATO army in any case or capabilities. Everything comes from the contributors. And the UK contributes like the member states contribute as allies as well. Now, the question is, the next answer is, there is no impediment whatsoever, and I want to stress that again and again and again. Member states buy from whoever they want, whatever they want. Okay. This is their sovereign choice. But when the EU money comes into play, then it becomes a bit more complicated. Why? Because first, we do that in the name of industrial policy. Industrial policy, treaty says, in the benefit of the European industry. And for good reasons, because if we want to actually develop capabilities that are actually key to our security, we cannot be faced with restrictions on use. If you need to ask permission to somebody else, if you actually can deploy, operate, a defense system, then your readiness can be a bit, undermined. It remains nonetheless that, for instance, half of the EDF projects include entities which are owned by UK entities, US entities. So we are not protectionist, but there is an obligation that any product from the activation of the EU budget has to come with no restriction on use. And this is, of course, a limit to how we can integrate, for instance, the UK. Now, I want to be very clear on the fact that we need to distinguish UK and Ukraine. There is a very clear policy from the Commission, at least, proposed in EDIP, to, as closely as we can, really entangle the Ukrainian defense industry to the European one. This is our clear interest, and we have mechanisms to do so. For instance, we have the Ukraine Support Instrument proposed in EDIP, which is meant to actually put the Ukraine almost the same standing as EU member states in terms of potential benefits.
Okay, fantastic. Jan, I have to ask for transparency reasons before. Do you also represent the UK's defense industry? Okay, well then, go. Then maybe we already know the answer. But it's sort of, to what extent do defense industries want to have sort of wider integration into sort of the European defense market? And to what extent is that not an issue because there are enough defense companies already in Europe?
So first of all, at ASD, as you were touching upon, then we represent the European defense industry base, which means that it's all European. So we have non-EU industry in ASD. We have Norway. We even have Turkey. So that's to get a picture of the extension. Why is it that broad? Because sometimes the defense industrial cooperation has other drivers than just the political guidance as well. So there's a lot of reasons for the UK component to stay within ASD as an industry member, because the industrial cooperation has not stopped just because of Brexit. And having said that, I think this also can connect to EU defense union or integration with the EU industrial defense technological industrial base and the Ukraine one. I think both of those two can coexist. I don't think that you have to choose one or the other. I think that they can even guide in different directions, because I think from one perspective it's very clear that the European defense industry has a huge interest to be in Ukraine and build up production facilities. Why? Not just the support. The support is obviously the main reason to be there, but at the same time, you gain first-hand battlefield experience in a way that you don't do anywhere for your products. Right. And the Ukrainians are, at the same time, extremely interested to make sure that the European defense industry is actually coming there to produce, rather than producing in Germany or the Netherlands, etc. Sure. Why? Because simply, when you produce a unit, whatever unit it is, it's sent out to the battlefield and it's damaged in 2 days. Then it goes back for repair. If it's being repaired in Ukraine, it's back again in 2 days on the battlefield. If the same unit is repaired in Germany, first you have the logistics to get it to Germany, and then repair it, and then get it back. And every border that you pass, you have export licenses, import licenses, customs controls, everything that's related to defense. So from that perspective, I think a big question as well that one should really ask, that Europe should ask itself, and that's, is Europe at war or not? Because I think we seem to want the output as if we would be at war, but still we operate with peacetime economies, peacetime processes in every perspective. Right. And this differs us from US, for example. So in US, if a defense company is needing to ramp up and to buy a machine tool on the commercial market, for example, and they place an order, and that supplier would have other customers in the line, then the government can point at the supplier and say, this is a defense company, you give them priority, and they start producing it. In Europe, it doesn't work like that. In Europe, the defense companies are queuing up with the orders for the commercial products, which means basically, as we speak, let me take the Nammo example because I think it's very painting, right? So when we speak about the increased ammunition production, and the 155 millimeter, etc., where also Commissioner Platon did an amazing job trying to move around in all the different production facilities in Europe and see what are the hinders, etc. Nammo, which is Scandinavian, so it's a combined Finnish-Norwegian ammunition company, also with activities in Sweden. At their headquarters in Norway, they had the capacity to increase their production rather dramatically in every other aspect. They had the facilities, they could find the manpower, they could beef up their supply chain, they could get the raw materials, they had everything but one thing, electricity. They could not increase the power that they needed. And still, the power was, and it was a local power provider, and the local power provider had the electricity that Nammo needed. But it was already contracted for a TikTok server hall. And nothing changes that, because we are not at war. Does it have to be like that?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This brings us to the end, not just of this panel, but of the entire conference. The fact that you didn't have a single question for the panel, I just freely interpret as that the panel did a fantastic job in preempting all of your questions and answering them right away. So thank you for that. I would like to have one big applause towards the end for two groups of people. The first, of course, is this fantastic panel on the defense side. Hold on. And the second is the IFO Institute and the Econpol Network, Florian Dorn, Susanne Richter all the way in the back for a fantastically set up conference. And there's a reception outside where you had your coffee previously. So do stick around. And maybe if you have want to ask a question, maybe a few of the panelists will be around as well. So thank you very much. And now you can applaud.
Oh, okay, I take this one. Actually, I would like to have the last word. So, I'm sorry. And I would have a full list of questions to the panelists, but I can do it in the break. So, good evening. It's me again, and I would like to have the pleasure to conclude today's event. First of all, I really enjoyed each discussion today. I think we had great discussions, valuable insights in our panels today. And yeah, we talked about, we started and we saw that Europe's economy and economic competitiveness is at stake. And I think we just started that, oh, okay, it does not look good with us, but I think we learned a lot in the panels today, and we saw that there's a good news. We can change it, but we just need to have the willingness, the political willingness, but also in our population, the willingness. So it's an issue of how to communicate that, for example, we have to reprioritize our spending. Yeah, I would like to thank the keynote speaker, the EG director, Kerstin Jorna, and the panelists of the first panel of how, and we learned that we urgently need a stronger single market, and we need it immediately, especially a deeper integration of services trade and the reduction of administration obstacles in Europe, especially also on the national barriers to unlock Europe's full potential. In the second panel, we discussed how do we have to adjust the innovation policy. I think it's a interesting interlinkage between the innovation policy, the breakthrough innovation. Maybe if you think about the ARPA system in the USA, how we can also learn from defense R&D and how we have spillovers to the economy. Also, for example, if you think about technological sovereignty, what we did not discuss today. And yeah, thanks for the third panel. It was very fascinating to hear all your different views. And finally, I also would like to thank our team and the team of the representation of the Free State of Bavaria to the European Union, that we had the opportunity once again to be here in this very nice venue close to the European Parliament. And please give a big applause also to Christian Undal. I think he did a very great job today. And if you would like to read more on the topics we discussed today, we have a lot of publications outside from the Institut and from Econpol Europe. We have a flyer in which you have QR codes to the different topics today, and sign up for our newsletters and our publication alerts. And finally, I would like to invite you to our reception. There are some food and drinks outside for you, and so we can deepen our conversation, questions and discussions. Thank you very much. All the best and goodbye.